Hello, my name is James Jones. I'm with First Band Media, and on behalf of Black Agenda Report, we're here with Howie Hawkins, recently announced presidential primary candidate for the Green Party. Wanted to see if we could get you to talk a little bit about that calculus to go from an exploratory committee to a candidate, primary candidate, and talk a little bit about the upcoming election.
Well, the exploratory phase was to see if we could really put together a campaign. I mean, you can't do the basics, like get on a ballot, hire some people to, actually work on this full time. Why play? And we've concluded we can do that. We can raise enough money to really assist on getting on the ballot. This country is unique among the electoral democracies of the world in how hard it is to even get on the ballot to run. And most voters out there don't realize that there are a lot of people who would like to run, but they can't get on the ballot because it's so much work. Example, in the United Kingdom, it takes 25 signatures to run for the member of the House of Commons, member of Parliament. That's like our Congress. Here, every state is different in the United States, but in my state, it's 3,500 signatures. That's New York. I was in North Carolina, it's over 13,000 signatures. Illinois, it's over 15,000 signatures. 25 versus thousands.
Right.
And that's part of voter suppression. They suppress your choices, suppress the parties. So we had to make sure we had the resources, we could raise the resources to really take on that task, which right now we have about 18 months till the actual election. We're going to spend most of the first year just getting on the ballot.
Right.
Now we do have a message. It's I'm the first candidate in this country to campaign for a Green New Deal. And I've campaigned on it since I ran for governor in New York in 2010. We ran on it in 2014 and 2018 for New York. Jill Stein picked it up and ran for president on it. It's been the Green Party signature program for the last decade. And people that follow politics closely know that. But what happened, funny thing, after the election, about a week later, AOC and the Sunshine Movement, sound like Casey and the Sunshine Band, there's a group. They occupy sitting in Pelosi's office. It brought national spotlight to the concept of a Green New Deal. And we appreciate that. What we don't appreciate is they took the brand and diluted the content in very important ways. They extended the deadline for getting to an end to the release of greenhouse gases and 100% clean energy from 2030, which we've been talking about, to 2050. You give a politician 32 years to reach a goal, what's he going to do today or she going to do today? They're going to say, that's not my problem. Let them worry about it when the deadline gets closer.
Right.
Down the road. Nothing's going to happen. And then they took away a very important part of our Green New Deal is an immediate ban on fracking for gas and oil and new fossil fuel infrastructure, pipelines and power plants. Because if we build this new fossil fuel infrastructure and frack the hell out of the country for oil and gas, we're going to be locked into fossil fuels for another 40 years at least, because investors are going to want to return on that investment in the infrastructure. And that's a climate holocaust. When I say that, I say that advisedly, because people are going to die because ecosystems will collapse, food production go down, and that's the foundation for human civilization. I mean, we're really on the edge of a really serious situation. And so it's kind of irritating that the Democrats, or some of them, take the concept, water it down so it really doesn't do the job, and then their leadership shoots it down anyway.
Right. The
original proposal was a select committee for a Green New Deal that would have the right to put legislation on the floor, subpoena expert witnesses to help educate the public and get people behind the legislation. And Speaker Pelosi first said, well, you can't just put it on legislation on the floor. You're going to have to put it through other committees. And you can't have subpoena power. In fact, you can't even have your select committee. We're going to set up the climate committee I had before, which takes away the link between what we call an economic bill of rights, the full employment and healthcare and housing and education. It links that to the climate change, because that's how we build a political majority for all of that. So we appreciate they kept that link in the Green New Deal that AOC and Senator Markey put forward, but Pelosi said, you can't have your select committee. So they come up with a non-binding resolution. Really, modest, like everybody could be for mom, apple pie and the flag. And then they wouldn't even do that. Pelosi won't let there be a vote on the House side. McConnell, the Republicans' leader of the Senate, said, "Oh, we'll have a vote," because he wants practically every Democrat running for president on the Senate side put them on record. And of course, they like the Green New Deal. They like to, caricaturize it, make it what it isn't. You can't fly, you can't eat hamburgers anymore. They come up with all this crazy stuff.
Right.
And so McConnell said you could vote, and then the Democrats said, "Oh, this is a trick." So we're all voting president. Except 4 of them actually voted against it. So, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and some progressives in the Democratic caucus say, "Yeah, we're for a Green New Deal." They water it down, and it doesn't get voted on it. But what the Democrats do as a whole is say the progressives, "See, we're for a Green New Deal too."
Right.
So it's a pretty sophisticated operation to defang the movement for a Green New Deal. What we're talking about is a World War II scale mobilization. During World War II, the federal government took over or built, in other words, they took factories over from companies like Ford and General Motors, or they built the factories themselves until we had a quarter of manufacturing capacity in this country run by the federal government. And we needed to do that in order to turn industry on a dime so the arsenal of democracy could defeat the Nazis. We need to do nothing less for the climate change, to defeat climate change. That's why we call it an equal socialist Green New Deal.
Right.
Government's got to play a role. We wait for profit incentives in the market. We're going to wait till it's too late because we've been waiting for decades. We've known this is coming. Exxon did the research. They didn't release it to the public, but we had other scientists find it. They knew it was coming. They knew the Arctic ice was going to melt. And of course, what do they do? Exxon and the Koch brothers are not going to take their profits from their oil and gas and reinvest it in renewables because they see climate change. They're going to do what they do, and that is extract more oil and gas.
Right.
So we can't leave it in their hands. We got to have basically nationalize big oil. We need a whole public energy system with democratic, locally elected boards for public energy districts that federated at the state and national level to plan out the whole system so we can make this transition. Kind of like what we did during World War II. We just want a more democratic, bottom-up process of planning. The other thing we'll do different is after World War II, the federal government built these factories. They just basically handed them over for virtually nothing to the super rich and their giant corporations. We're going to turn them over to the workers as worker owned cooperatives. We're going to spread the wealth so that when working people work in these things, they will get their full value of their labor. When there's a so-called profit or net income at the end of the year, they will get their share of it based on the labor they contributed. That will create a more egalitarian, fair distribution of income at the beginning. What progressives in the Democratic Party do, the best of them, like Bernie Sanders, is they want capitalism to work so they can tax it and then partially ameliorate the unequal distribution that happens in the first place. We're about having a fair distribution in the first place.
Right. Working
People should get the full value of their labor, what they create after you pay for the expenses of, what you got to do in any firm, pay for the capital equipment, and you got to pay your taxes and those things. What's left in a capitalist firm, if you're a worker, you get a fixed wage. If you work hard or you shirk, you get the same wage. You have no incentive to be more productive. When the work go up, the better you work, the more your co-op makes, the bigger share you will make in the end. So they're actually more efficient.
Right.
A lot to say for them. So we want economic democracy. That's what socialism is to us. You want public firms to be democratically accountable. There are firms that are publicly owned and not accountable, like the these housing, the GSCs, the government-supported enterprises, Fannie Mae. We had no say in them, and then they partnered with Wall Street. They really become an adjunct to Wall Street. We don't. That's to us just because the state owns it doesn't mean it's socialist. It's got to be democratic.
Right.
By the same token, in the market sector, private sector, a co-op, if it's economic democracy, that's a socialist institution. A credit union as opposed to a capitalist bank, and so forth.
Right.
So we want to spread that because we think people will not foul their own nest. They'll take care of the environment. Whereas if you're out to maximize profit, you're going to try to externalize costs on the environment, you're going to pollute, you're going to extract resources with no sense that you're depleting them, and so forth. So we're not going to foul our own nest. We're not going to move our jobs to China because we'll pay ourselves less. I mean, why would the hell would we do that?
Right.
But a capitalist firm will if they get cheaper labor.
Sure.
So those are, all reasons to speak for an eco-socialist solution, not just to the climate crisis, but we got to deal with that. So when I announced Tuesday, I said there were 3 life or death issues we face that we've got to address that 2 major parties are not providing real solutions for. One is the climate crisis. Another is we're in this insane new nuclear arms race. And everybody's so focused on Russiagate and what happened there and Trump and what he's doing that this is like not even covered. People don't realize, started under Obama, Trump has continued it, $1 trillion nuclear modernization program with an emphasis on tactical nukes that are supposed to go into conventional battlefields, and they think they'll limit it to there. No, that'll trigger a strategic nuclear war and annihilate us all. So that's the second life or death issue we face. And the third is working people in this country, the wages have stagnated. They're actually $1 less now. The average wage for a full-time worker than it was in 1974 or late 73 when it peaked. And of course, people borrow, so they go into debt to maintain living standards. There's been inflation in particular areas like housing and healthcare, so that's declined our living standards. And what we find now is that the poorest counties have a life expectancy 20 years less than the wealthy counties, which is a proxy for the fact that the working class is living 20 years less than the upscale class. And that's a life or death issue. If you're a working person, every year you're going to face a month or 2 or more where you're not going to be able to pay the rent, the utilities, or you're going to have to skimp on groceries, not to mention medical bills you might have, or paying off your student loans or paying for tuition for your kids to go to college.
Right.
Most people who are working face those things, and that stresses people out. It's probably part of the explanation for the opioid epidemic, which is one of the reasons life expectancy.
Self-medication.
Self-medication, alcoholism, drug abuse, and just, psychosomatic, I don't know if psychosomatic is the right word, but, high blood pressure,
right,
stress eating, and people get obese, and they get diabetes. I mean, all that stuff kind of fits in with being poverty or struggling working class.
Right.
That's a life or death issue, and neither party, Democrat or Republican, has an answer for that. They don't really care because they'll fight over God, guns, gays, and abortion and make it like open warfare. But when they get elected and they go deal with economic policy, it's all this trickle-down economics. It's sometimes called neoliberalism, which is kind of the idea that it's laissez-faire. It's laissez-faire for the working class, but if you're a corporation, they give you tax breaks and subsidies and all that kind of stuff. Corporate managed trade that working people can't even get access to the trade tribunals. It's all states and corporations, all that kind of stuff. And then on foreign policy, it's like neoliberal economics and neoconservative foreign policy. Obama said Venezuela was a threat to our national security. Come on, man, that's absurd. Venezuela's got enough problems with their economy. They're just like trying to deal with their own problems. What are they going to do? Invade the United States? I mean, this is insane. Yet, and of course, Trump and his people are threatening Venezuela. That's bipartisan. Most of the Democratic leadership, all the Democratic leadership, Pelosi, Schumer, those people, they all lined up with Trump. Oh yeah, we're going after Venezuela. So that's what this campaign is about, to offer real solutions. And real solutions can't wait because we're running out of time.
Right.
The climate crisis, nuclear arms race. For example, those weapons are on air trade. In the same way that a mucker puts a gun to your head and says, give me all your money. You don't have to shoot them, you're using them to coerce people.
Right.
So we got to back off that. So those are some of the reasons we're running. And my campaign, I'm a retired teamster.
Okay, wait a minute. Give me all your in the bathroom.
My pension was cut thanks to some progressive Democrats. Joe Biden, strong arm in Congress, to pass an amendment to the Employment Retirement Income Security Act, which back in the early 70s said our earned benefits cannot be cut. Well, they changed that law. After I've been working and I'm about to retire, the retirees in my fund, it's the New York State Teamster Pension Fund, they got cut 30%. I got cut 20% because the cuts were made just before I retired. Mm-hmm. And that's thanks to bipartisan, that's the kind of thing why we need alternatives. So I'm retired now, and a bunch of Greens decided, they thought, well, you ran for governor pretty good, maybe we should run for president. I was actually working in the post office over Christmas most recently. 12-hour shifts. I worked on Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's days. I only had 3 days off in 2 months.
Wow.
Just to make up for those pension cuts. And then I checked my email, and people are drafting Howie. My first thing was, well, we can find somebody. Let's look around, but we didn't find anybody available who wanted to do it just time, or to think about it. She has been through the mill twice, so that's probably more than we should impose on anybody. So we formed the exploratory committee, and it looks like the sport's out there, so now we're off and running.
Can I ask you quick something that you had said earlier that kind of resonated with me is some of the concepts when I'm hearing what you're saying is I'm thinking about basically permanent austerity, permanent war, and something like Abraham Lincoln said about basically corporations fleecing the public, and essentially we're told that we can't get to where we need to be without some kind of fleecing mechanism set up to fleece the public rather than actually take care of our basic needs. And I'm just throwing some of these concepts out there just to see if, where, that we're faced with what I call just options rather than choices, and that really how rather than having a plan of austerity and despair, like in one of your previous campaigns, you said you had a plan of prosperity, and so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Well, it's interesting you bring up Lincoln because his first inaugural address, he said labor is superior to capital. Capital is created by labor. And in his time, the ideal of mobility was a young person to go work for a farmer or an artisan, save up your money, then you become a farmer or artisan. And after a while, you at the point where you can hire some other people. So people kind of move through the class structure in the course of their lifetime. That was the ideal. And coming out of the Civil War, of course, corporations made a lot of money on the war. Mm-hmm. The railroads became the first modern huge corporations. In their position, basically semi-monopoly, they were able to squeeze the farmers. Most people were, agrarian workers, either small business people or artisans with their own tools, or most people farmers. And of course, after the Civil War, given the position of the railroads, they could basically charge whatever they wanted. They were squeezing the farmers, and then the suppliers of farm equipment and seeds, they were squeezing them. And then the credit, they were keeping the money tight, so farmers were going into debt, and the land started concentrating, and people that did have their own land now were tenant farmers, sharecroppers, and were being pushed off the land. That was where we got the labor farmer populist movement, the Greenback Labor Party and the People's Party. And they stood for the working people. They called them the industrial classes. They meant both people in the factories and people on the farms.
Right.
And it was a class-based movement. I think the American equivalent of what became the social parties in Europe.
Right.
And what killed them was they cross-endorsed the Democratic candidate in 1896, William Jennings Bryan. Right. It really wasn't a populist. He did sort of do the free silver panacea, which wasn't the real monetary policy of populists, and a lot of the other programs he didn't really care about. So that killed that movement. The next wave was the socialists. Right. And they kind of dissolved into the Democratic Party with the New Deal coalition. It disappeared as a distinct alternative, a critique of the system. And of course, Roosevelt famously told Norman Thomas, the socialist leader in the 30s, "Hey, Mr. Thomas, we carried out your program." And Thomas said, "Yeah, on a stretcher." They took some bits and pieces, but they didn't change the system. Right. And so, since that time, we haven't had an independent left in this country. It's about time we did, because it's getting worse, and they're not solving the arms race, the climate crisis, or the crisis of working people. Moving into
some other subjects here, I wanted to see if you could, if you had a message for our audience and for voters as we go through the primaries and we watch the progressive agenda become, basically go to the graveyard. what message do you have for voters as they're moving through the primaries and once we get into the general election, where do we go from here so we don't have a repeat of the last election? Or actually of almost every other election that we've had.
Yeah, well, the last election, Clinton paved the way for Trump by counting on upper middle class white folks in the suburbs to vote for her. I mean, her and her surrogates, like Chuck Schumer and Ed Rendell, former governor of Pennsylvania, said for every white worker we lose in the Midwest, we're going to get 2 Republican women in the suburbs. And those women went with Trump. And the workers didn't actually go with Trump. Some did, but most of them stayed home. The biggest group that voted for Obama and didn't vote for Clinton stayed home. Right. Next biggest group voted third party. Jill Stein, the Green candidate, so that's Libertarian. And a very small group flipped over from Obama to Trump. And that's how they lost that election. So that scenario, if it happens again, means the Democrats didn't give people a reason to come out and vote for them.
Right.
Now for us, we the people we really want to reach in the Green Party, the people that haven't been voting because they rightly see neither of the big parties are representing them. That tends to be the working class people, the youth, and people of color who vote in lower amounts.
Right.
And people say, oh, they don't care or they're apathetic. Now, I've done a lot of door knocking over the last couple of decades. Most of those people say, I don't want to be a fool. Neither party cares about me, so I'm not going to care about them. Right. I'm not going to get played by them. Of course, they are getting played when they don't vote because then they don't have to be paid attention to. So, I try to argue, you're getting played by not participating. Right. We need to build a party that represents the people.
Can I ask a question? This is a concept that it's not necessarily a prevalent concept, but I think it's a concept worth considering is of course we've heard the rhetoric of lesser evil and stuff like that, or the concept of spoiling elections, basically counting votes before they're cast. But essentially that's a mechanism of coercing people to give away their votes. And, that, of course, that doesn't speak very well of a functioning democracy. But what would you have to say to people that feel coerced to give away their votes to a deplorable candidate to avoid a despicable candidate?
I would say don't waste your vote. Vote for what you want and make the politicians come to you.
Right.
If the Democrats think they can take you for granted, they're not going to care what you think about anything.
Right.
They think they got you in their hip pocket. If you vote against them, then they're going to have to pay attention to you. I got 5% of the vote running for governor in 2014. And Governor Cuomo, who wanted to roll up the vote, get more than his dad ever got with the previous governor, and get ready to run for president, actually got less votes in 2014 than he got in 2010. And I got 5% of the vote. So we had to look at what we were saying.
Right.
We're ban on fracking, paid family leave, $15 minimum wage, tuition-free higher education in public institutions. And he moved on all those issues. We got the ban on fracking. We got paid family leave. We got a schedule toward $15 an hour. Much slower than we would have done, but he had to respond. And the tuition-free higher education really wasn't. Bernie Sanders came and gave his blessings to it. It's a terrible program. It's basically a top-off scholarship that only, 3% of SUNY state university students and 2% of city universities. You basically got to have enough money to go full-time and graduate in time. So if you're a working-class person that has to go part-time while you're working, you can't even get the scholarship.
Right.
And that's what the Democrats do. They take the program, water it down, and sort of take the label but not the substance. So you got to watch them. But the fact is he had to move somewhat. So now that's a debate in New York. How do we really give tuition-free higher education? It's not anymore how do we cut public subsidies, how do we raise tuition.
Right.
That whole discussion has changed. And that's because we got 5%. You don't have to win the office. You get a significant vote. You're part of the discussion going forward. And that's what the left has got to realize. Don't give your vote away to some people that don't stand for what you stand for. If you're particularly social, you have no business being in the Democratic Party. The class independence of the socialist movement is like the first principle of socialist politics.
Right.
And we got all these socialists with Bernie Sanders leading the way, taking us into the Democratic Party. where you're the minor partner in a capitalist party and its coalition. Right. So you're undermining your own politics. That's why we should vote for what we want.
Absolutely.
And the idea that you can't win, well, the election hasn't happened yet.
Right.
And the fact is the Greens do win. We have over 100 elected people around the country. And what I want to see us do is start electing thousands. Mm-hmm. There's over 500,000 offices up for election according to the U.S. Census for general purpose governments. So that's, towns, cities, villages, counties, state legislatures, school boards. And we should be electing thousands, and that becomes our bench for electing people to state legislature, Congress. And when we got a caucus in Congress, when we run somebody for president, you're not going to be able to ignore us. So that's the way we build up. But we got to run for president to get those ballot lines so we can actually run those candidates for Congress.
Absolutely.
And so when people say, oh, why don't you wait? Why don't you start from the bottom? Yeah, the way we start from the bottom is get ballot lines, which means we got to run candidate for president, some states for governor, because it varies from state to state. There are 50 state election laws. But in about 40 of those states, what the presidential candidate does affects whether there will be a ballot line for the next election cycle.
Right.
That's why we got to be in this.
Well, is there anything else that that was absolutely fantastic. Is there anything else before we leave that you would like to say that I didn't cover or ask by any means?
There are a lot of issues in this race. We got civil liberties problems. We got mass surveillance by the state. We got a full frontal assault on free press in the Julian Assange Espionage Act indictments, which go back to the World War I. That act has always been used for repression. They started out with Eugene Debs and Victor Berger, the Socialist Party, and they got Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman and used it to, send them back to Russia. And it wasn't used much until the Obama administration. Now Obama and Trump are using it against whistleblowers that are telling us what the government actually is doing that we didn't know about, that we ought to know about, whether it's war crimes or spying on us.
Right.
So that's a huge issue. We've had growing economic and racial inequality for the last 5 decades. Schools are becoming more segregated again, really since the 1980s. The Democrats have been co-opted by this charter industry, which says that's the solution to educational inequality, when actually it's a way to raid the public treasury.
Fleeceocracy.
And, fleeceocracy, kleptocracy.
Yeah.
And they backed away from school desegregation. So now you can't reduce racial equality and racial justice to economic issues because there's racial discrimination.
Sure.
We are not even enforcing the law. That's where you start. And then there's a question of reparations. For 400 years, what we did to African Americans, there is a bill to study how we best do reparations. I support that. John Conyers carried it for a long time. Now it's Sheila Jackson Lee out of Texas. But I say we should make a down payment on reparations while they're studying. And that's that economic Bill of Rights we were talking about. Because remember Martin Luther King, the March on Washington for jobs and freedom. Before he got to the dream, what did he talk about? He said we came here to cash a promissory. And he said he didn't believe the Bank of Justice was bankrupt. And the demands of that march were the economic Bill of Rights that Franklin Roosevelt had called upon Congress to enact in both his 1944 and 1945 State of the Union addresses, his last two. Democrats have had a majority of both houses in Congress for every president, from Roosevelt, Truman, Johnson, Kennedy, Clinton, Carter, Obama. They all had at least one session where they could have enacted some of these rights, economic rights, and they haven't enacted any of them.
Right.
It's another reason why I don't let the Democrats, they'll talk a good game, Medicare. We're not going to get Medicare for all or a real Green New Deal for the Democratic Party. They've made that clear. I mean, my state of New York, right? We finally got the state Senate in Democratic hands. And the people promoting the Democrats in those races said, then we'll get Medicare for all. And some other things that we're not getting. The Democrats are for Medicare for all. We've seen this in California, we've seen it in Hawaii, we've seen it in Vermont. Till they actually have the power to do it, and suddenly they can find reasons why they can't.
Right.
Or public campaign finance. The state assembly in New York passed it every year for year after year after year. Now this year when they can actually enact it, they wait a minute. We can't fight this dark money and these independent expenditures We can't disarm, so we can't do public campaign finance. So,
well, a friend of mine said this. I just wanted, because you seem like you're kind of leading into this. His comment was, and he said this for years. He said the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans is that the Republicans say they're going to do crazy stuff and they actually do it, whereas the Democrats feed empty rhetoric just for electoral gains, but it's completely empty. There's no follow up. Is that it's smoke and mirrors.
And then they join the Republicans in some of those crazy things.
Yeah.
Like this new nuclear arms race. We're doing nothing about climate change.
Right.
We're not giving a crap about what happens to working people in this country.
Right.
And in fact, like I was mentioning with the pension, I mean, Joe Biden, the working man's friend, is how he's campaigning. He was strong-arming Congress to get that law changed. And my pension got 20% because of that guy. And, you know, the Democrat that sponsored it in the Senate was the founder of the Progressive Caucus. George Miller represented Richmond, very progressive city, where we had a great mayor in California, the next district north of Barbara Lee in the Bay Area. Those are the progressives in the Democratic Party. They're not our friends when it push comes to shove. So, yeah, we need our own party. We need to act and speak for ourselves instead of, I call it political ventriloquism. You know, too many progressive-minded people think we can't put our own candidates and speak for ourselves. We got to speak through these Democrats.
Right.
So we're always trying to lobby them and push them and, you know, like try to get them to say and do what we would.
Right.
They won't, so we should do it ourselves and have our own movement.
I agree. Is there just for our viewers that are interested in your campaign? I know your website, but can you tell them your website and any way that they can get involved and any recommendations that you have so folks can become mobilized and actually join a real movement toward actually achieving these goals?
Well, they should go to the website howiehawkins.us. Sign up so we can stay in communication with you and donate so we can. First goal is to get federal matching funds. We need $5,000 for 20 states, each state $5,000, and contributions up to $250. And when we reach that goal, the federal government will match those donations up to $250 per individual. And basically that doubles the money that we can then use to get on the ballot. So we can, we can do it much cheaper than any other party because we got a lot of volunteers. But we got to have some people coordinating and working full time on this so we can get it done because it's a huge job. It's like $1.5 million signatures. At $1 a signature, which is very cheap, that's $1.5 million.
Right.
So that's the thing we got to do this year. The Greens always wait till next year, and they're always in a rush and don't get it done. We're starting this year about 20 states right now where we could be petitioning. We already have 20 states with a ballot line in this cycle. So we get those two. We go into January 1st with 40 states. Then we got the ones we can't start till next year, but we'll get them done.
Right.
And the media knows we're in all the states. It's just a whole lot of reason why we should do that now. So we got to raise that money. That's probably the immediate goal. And then we go out and petition. That's what we're going to need help with. And what we want to do then, once we got the ballot lines, is hire field organizers. The Greens are great activists. We show up. Peace demonstration, environmental demonstration, living wage. We show up. We're there at the demonstrations. We're there at the picket lines. We're there at the public forums and public hearings. But we could be a lot better at being organizers, not just activists.
Right.
How do we broaden the base? I spoke about the working class and the youth and the people of color that vote in low numbers because they don't feel nobody speaking to them. Well, how do we get them engaged in our party and our movement so they do feel empowered and they feel their vote? It's not all they do, but they'll vote and they'll do other activity. I think a big part of it is the immense majority is the working class in this country, and they're a sleeping giant, and they've been basically discouraged and pacified into inactivity.
Right.
And if we can get them active, there's no stopping what we can do because we are the majority. So that's why we want to hire organizers, help Green Party locals, expand their base, how to keep people engaged, how do you talk to communities that maybe aren't relating to you, how do you build trust, what kind of things do you do. Sometimes it's support what you find out they're doing and really help them win something. And you say, hey, we could use some help on our thing. And you can talk about issues. That's the kind of stuff we want to help people do.
Right.
That's a big purpose of the campaign. And of course, as we get closer to the election, then part of that organizing is the traditional election canvas. You know, go out and talk to people, find out where the support is, and make sure they vote. Get a storefront set up. You know, I launched the Black Panther Party where I came up in the Bay Area. They had a storefront. And a lot of things they're famous for, it wasn't Huey Newton, Bob Shields, and Americana coming up with a 10-point program and saying, what's the answer? They did put that out there. That helped get people interested. So people come into the storefront and say, we got a problem. Like seniors. They cash their Social Security check, and then the muggers would get them on the way to the grocery store. So Panthers were escorting them. Sickle cell anemia was another program that came up from, and the free vector program, because that'll pay off in the long term. And instead of, I think part of the problem in our social movements now is you have these billionaire corporate liberals who fund organizations, they hire staff, they sit in their staff room and decide what we're going to do, and then we get orders on the internet. You know, move on or whoever tells you.
Right.
This is the petition you decide. This is the issue you need to be worried about. This is the demonstration you should go to. And we don't meet with each other in our own communities and think for ourselves and educate each other. And so we're being kind of led around by the nose by the big money.
Right.
That's kind of hidden behind these groups that advertise at us.
Well, they're organizing for us rather than us self-organizing.
Exactly. And if somebody else is doing that work for you, there's another agenda you're being attached to. And we're better off if we, set our own agenda.
Right.
The grassroots, that's, regular people won't sell out. The middle class staffers, they orient to the Democrats because that's where the funders orient the whole movement to. And that's how we end up with, the progressives back in classic example, the anti-Iraq war movement. The biggest anti-war coalition decided the only way we're going to stop the war is to elect a Democrat. And John Kerry's running around reporting for duty. He wanted a surge bigger than Bush got.
Yeah.
And
Well,
he was a pro-war candidate the anti-war movement supported.
Well, speaking as someone that was involved and pretty heavily involved in the anti-war movement, we used to one of the things is that Kerry wanted to fight a smarter imperialist war. He wasn't against the war. Is that a lot of people were against the war because it was Bush's war,
right?
Not because they actually were fundamentally against the war.
And all the people who demonstrated against Bush's war when Obama got elected, the Democrats tended to go back home. Oh, we got a Democrat in there.
Right.
And Obama, it kind of like Nixon Vietnamese the war, Obama droned the war. Mm-hmm. And so instead of putting the troops on the ground, he'd have his kill list every Tuesday. He put this in the New York Times to show how tough he was as he went in the 2012 election.
Right.
He's sitting there like a mafia don saying, we'll kill this one, we'll let that one go for now. That's it's pretty gruesome, and it's counterproductive because we so often get the wrong people or we get collateral people who then get mad and they want to get back at us. So we're actually creating more terrorists than we're killing. Yeah, we came up out of World War II with, some international norms and treaties and human rights we supposedly respected. And then as the Cold War developed, that really went out the window. It became a cover for basically like Vietnam.
Right.
I'm coming up in the 50s, I'm diving into my desk, and I thought the adults were crazy. Why don't you just get rid of the nukes? But, we're supposed to cover, duck and cover. Yeah, and I knew enough even as a little kid to know that was worthless. And, but I did agree, I'd see all this propaganda on TV and my weekly reader about the communists. So I said, well, yeah, we got to fight the communists in Vietnam. Until I was asked to debate it in 7th grade. And I did a little research and I found that their Declaration of Independence was modeled on ours. And there was supposed to be an election, and the guy that wrote that, Ho Chi Minh, probably would have won. And we didn't like him, so we didn't let the election happen.
Right.
Suddenly I'm saying, wait a minute, who's stopping democracy here? So yeah, the international norms, it's like we want others to observe them, but we totally ignore them ourselves as a country.
Right. And
then we can't credibly condemn other countries and be heard when we're violating those norms all the time.
Sure. So
that gets to the foreign policy. I say we should be the world's humanitarian superpower, make friends instead of enemies, help the developing countries with basic things that are not that expensive, like clean water, elementary education, preventive health care, and let's help them leap right over the fossil fuel age into the solar age and have a global Green New Deal.
Well, that's absolutely fantastic. I appreciate your time, and I did throw some additional pieces in there, and I appreciate you tolerating that.
That's fine.
So, is there any parting thoughts that you would like to share with?
What the Black Freedom Movement did with the March on Washington in 1963, the Freedom Budget in 1966, the Poor People's Campaign in 1968, A. Philip Randolph, Byron Rustin, and that whole civil rights leadership that said, realize that to win the civil rights that they just got enacted into law, in the face of this rising white backlash, they would have to provide economic security for everybody, the white workers as well as the black and brown and Indian workers. And that's why they decided we're going to get these universal rights, but we're going to do it in a race-conscious way, and that, unlike the old New Deal, we're not going to discriminate.
Right.
And what white people got to understand is when something is set up aimed at black folks, it's going to get some white folks too. Like the Social Security originally did not include agricultural workers and domestic servants. Well, there were sure a lot of white cotton pickers in the South or Irish domestic servants in the North that were excluded along with the black folks who was aimed at by the Dixiecrats.
Right.
Racism is in the interest of white people because it's a divide and conquer tactic. And black folks make it the flu, but white folks are going to get the cold and everybody's sick, and that's what we're going to fight.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Howie, and we look forward to hearing more from you. Go to howiehawkins.us. Please donate. Please get involved. Get in touch. Sign up. And we really appreciate you standing up to run this election. A lot of us were very hopeful that your exploratory campaign would convert into a campaign. Those of us that have known you over the years and had a lot of respect for you, we've all been very excited and thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you. And remember, this is not just me out here. It's a collective leadership.
Right.
People from all kinds of backgrounds involved in this. I'm just the one that's going to be the voice, but I'm coming up with these ideas not just by myself. And I want to listen as I go around working with Greens, what their particular issues are in their states or, their thoughts on any issue we're facing nationally.
Well, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.